Good day, everybody. My name is Eric Reeker. I'm a field specialist with Ohio State University Extension and the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, field specialist in farm management. I was asked to give a few comments on the economic factors or economic impacts of making the corn and or soybean replanting decision. As many of you know, in this year, in 2025, there's been some fields that had some excessive moisture after planting. This field in particular, the soybean stand is quite good despite having a few puddles of water. But throughout the state, we experienced a cool, wet period after some planting in late April, early May. And so that has caused some farmers to evaluate reduced stands of corn and soybean, in some cases zero stand if there was ponded water. So some key economic factors that may affect your replanting decision really comes down to an analysis or a comparison of the yield of the crop that is still out there, the yield potential that of the crop that was planted early and perhaps lived through the weather conditions that we had this spring, versus going out and replanting that field or adding some seed and the potential of that newly replanted crop. And of course, our other field specialists, Osler in corn and Laura in soybeans, have perhaps talked about the yield reduction that is experienced when we plant after, say, mid-May or May 10th. In corn, we experience a bushel to a bushel and a half yield reduction per day. In soybeans, you know, that mid-May or May 10th point and after, we're experiencing 0.3 to potentially a half bushel reduction in yield per day, depending on the weather conditions, of course. Well, when you factor those things in and say we're coming out in early June and realizing that we have a reduced stand and we need to replant, the yield comparisons are an important part of that. And so the yield reduction that is potentially experienced as a result of planting late may influence your decision as to whether to do that. We know that on the farm management or the risk management side, crop insurance policies don't necessarily discount late planting until after June 5th for corn. There's a 1% reduction in your guaranteed coverage, and there's no reduction in soybean coverage until after June 20th. So perhaps the crop insurance companies look at it a little bit different than we do in an agronomic perspective. The other thing is, does a time of pollination affect that yield? So if we put a crop out early, perhaps it's in a better spot to pollinate and get a better yield than a crop that's planted later and might perhaps have to pollinate in a very dry period. And of course, we're not in the field that's behind us today, but in some fields in Ohio, we have complete drowned out spots. And to me, replanting those spots once the conditions get right, soil conditions get right, seem quite obvious. If you have zero stand, you're going to have zero yield. The second important economic consideration or economic factor to consider is, will the crop insurance policy or the payment, replant payment, cover those cash costs that are associated with replanting? Okay, and I need to admit, I am not a crop insurance agent, and so the discussion with your crop insurance agent is extremely important in this decision. Some policy backgrounds that I think are pretty well known is the replant policy for corn it pays out at 8 bushels times the projected price. So in 2025, that's 8 bushels times a $4.70 projected price. Roughly $37 to $38 is the indemnity payment that a farmer would get on corn acres to replant. On soybeans, it's 3 bushels times the projected price in February, which is $10.54. So around $31 or $32 is the repayment indemnity that you would receive for soybeans. And of course, there's many other policy components, again, to review with your agent. The one of those is you must have the lesser of 20 acres to replant of a particular crop, or 20% of your field unit to replant. in order to receive those payments. There's some other nuances to policies that might kick in earlier. Again, important to have that conversation with your agent. So that's a little bit on the crop insurance policy. So what are those costs, those cash costs that need to be covered when you consider replanting a field? So those include seed, those include labor and management, that includes wear and tear on equipment and fuel to run that equipment to replant. And finally, as we plant late, we know that crop is, in particular in corn, that corn crop is going to harvest later, and so there are increased drying costs. So let's break those down just a little bit. With regard to seed, we know that some companies, seed companies, will provide seed for replanting. Some companies pay a partial cost, and generally that's built in to their initial price. Advisable to do those agronomic stands if you have a consistent stand at what our agronomists recommend. I'm not going to touch on those points because I hope they did. If you have a consistent stand at the minimum stand count, it may be worth just leaving that stand go till harvest, because some things because the yield potential is still there. So seed, talk with your agronomist. Make sure that you talk also with your seeds person, and if they provide a replant seed at a discount or built into the cost of their seed. Labor and management, it does take time away from the farm. If you're having a planter operator or tractor operator going to spend a day or 2 or 3 replanting, perhaps that person's time could be better repurposed to side dress corn or to spray beans, etc. Fuel, when we look at our budgets, we know to run a planter, the cost of fuel is about 4/10 of a gallon of fuel per acre, depending on the size of your equipment. But that's not an insignificant cost, but it is it's not as big as seed or perhaps labor and management. Wear and tear on equipment. Again, if that planter, that tractor has to go over some of the acres again, there's going to be a little bit of wear and tear. And then the final economic factor mentioned already was the increased drying cost. In our Ohio Farm Custom Rate Survey, the cost that we have come up with an average is 5 cents per bushel per point of moisture. So if we're used to harvesting 20% moisture corn and we only have to dry off 5 percentage points because we got into the field in a reasonable time, perhaps that percentage is increased. Perhaps we're harvesting 25% corn instead of 20% moisture corn because of the late planting or the replant decision that we made. Take that times 5 cents per bushel per point. And again, those are not insignificant costs that you weave into this decision. So again, the summary of costs that you need to cover should you decide that replant decision: seed, cost of labor and management, fuel, and the increased drying costs. There's, I'm sure, other costs that I haven't talked about, perhaps maybe more nominal than the ones mentioned. The other thing that I know, we're standing in front of a soybean field, but livestock producers in some cases think about this decision, this replant decision, differently. If you have ruminant livestock, oftentimes you have an opportunity to make silage. And so if you're producing silage or harvesting silage instead of grain, this replant decision may factor differently for you. Hope this video was helpful. 2 key economic decisions related to the replanting decision is: will the existing stand out yield the replanted stand, or vice versa? And then finally, will the crop insurance indemnity payment for replanting cover those replant costs that need to be paid for? I hope this video was helpful. Good luck in the rest of your season.